Pragmatic instructor. So good to have you. I'm Eddie Gordon, courseware designer at Pragmatic Institute. And we've got just a few housekeeping items as we start off today. First of all, if you're able to, turn your camera on because we like to see you. We like to see you smile. And of course, it makes it much more personal. And this is a small group, so we love persons. And as we go through the questions today, if you have some that occur to you as we're speaking, put them in the chat. You can either send them to the whole group or you can send them to just me, whichever you are comfortable with. I'll keep a constant eye over on the chat and I'll throw those questions over to our instructor as we go along. But that's why we're here. It's an Ask Me Anything, not just a listen along. So ask your questions if you've got them. We also have questions that were pre-submitted, so we've got lots to go on and lots to cover that will be useful for you. Right at the top here, we want to give a plug to our brand new Pragmatic alumni community. We are very proud of it, very excited. The Pragmatic Institute online community is for members only. This is separate than the Alumni Resource Center, which everyone has access to if they are an alumni of our course, an alumnus of our course. The online community is for members only, and in there you will find a curated library, peer discussion groups, mentor opportunities. Our instructors frequent it as well. But it is a fantastic resource and unlike anything that we have ever offered and that I believe anybody else has ever offered in our industry as well. So check it out. There is an open house that you can check out June 10th, 1:30 Eastern time at the link that's on the bottom of the slide there, pragmaticinstitute.com/community. Take a look at it. And with that, it is time to introduce our instructor for today. Do not adjust your television sets. His shirt really is psychedelic pink flowers, guaranteed to entertain us all, both visually and with his words. Please welcome Paul Young. Paul, how are you?
Very well. Happy to be here. Coming to you from my virtual beach house.
Yeah, I wish I were social distancing wherever you are. That looks fantastic.
Right? No, I know.
Let's jump right in. We've got a bunch of questions that were submitted in advance. And of course, if you have questions as you're listening, stick them there in the chat for us and we'll get into it. We had the first one here from Daniel Wu, and I saw that Daniel just jumped on. Welcome, Daniel. This is a long one. This is a big one, a substantial question. I could read the whole thing for everybody, but we've got you here. Do you mind just unmuting and maybe summarize your question for Paul and for the rest of us?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for taking my my question first. So the reason it's long is because I just want to give a little background. So the context is that it's a healthcare B2B organization and we're working towards go-to-market. And the general KPIs, which are adoption of the product, percentage of clients that adopted the product, implementing this online appointment scheduling solution on their website, and also the second KPI is the volumes of appointments that are scheduled by the patient. So we want to be able to increase the mix of using our particular product in their mix of appointment scheduling. And it's a product that is free, and the clients pay for a larger offering. And so I apologize if there's background noise. I need to close the doors onto this room. No. And so understanding that in go-to-market, the first ask is there's your typical playbooks for product marketing, sales enablement, working with CSMs, et cetera, building these toolkits, et cetera. But I'm also just wondering, to drive new adoption for new existing clients, what other effective strategies and mechanisms do other organizations, not necessarily in healthcare, employ that can help drive scalable adoption? So that's really the first question. And second one is really just say, hey, well, do you have any case studies or examples that perhaps it's a education training or developer community as a mechanism to drive adoption?
Okay. All right, Daniel. Hey, good to meet you virtually. So let's talk about that a little bit, because that's a little bit of I understand your question, but it's a little bit of a tricky one, because there's a couple of different things going on there. First of all, you're not. It sounds like you have a difference in the buyer persona versus the user persona. They're not the same person. It sounds like your buyers are like the doctor or the practice or the office manager, and then the users are the end, patients who are trying to be scheduling. And so I guess my first question back to you is, if you're talking about increasing adoption and usage of your tool, are you talking about at the patient level, the end patient level, or are you talking about at the office level, the doctor's office level, or are you talking about both?
I am talking about both.
Okay.
We ultimately do want to drive client adoption, but that doesn't mean it's utilized. And so in our organization, and I think many organizations, it's to say that if a client adopts it, but doesn't necessarily utilize it, it is not really useful. And I'm trying to hold it to a higher bar. And that's why there's 2 KPIs there.
Sure, right. So you have the right metrics, which is usage, because it's not a distinct line item that is for fee. So it's definitely going to be usage, and adoption is going to be the KPI you're going to look at. But we're going to have to separate out the tactics that we would use to go after the end patient and get them to start using versus the tactics we would use to gain adoption at the office level, for example. And if we were just sort of like generalize it, not specific to your situation, but just for everybody who might watch this in the future or is on now, when you think about a sort of a tiered route to market where you have a channel through which you're going through to reach your end users, it's a little bit different than like in a B2B, where if I'm selling to a CTO, that CTO can then put the product in front of his users and say, you got to use this because, I'm the buyer, I made a decision, you don't have a choice. So in that case, adoption's less important, but for you, it will be. And so let's talk about the end user first, the patient, and how to get them to adopt. The number one, when you're in B2B to C, which is what you're talking about, the number one thing we have to do to make the patients adopt the product, other than giving them that as their only option to schedule appointments, is to essentially make our solution make their life easier, better, or faster. And so if we can show them that, hey, if you call to get an appointment, it takes you, on average 12 minutes, or you can do it in 30 seconds on this app, then it's a pretty easy sell at that point. Everybody likes saving time. Everybody likes saving headaches. And so usually it's going to be through user experience design, and it's going to be through making it more efficient for them to go through this platform. Like, for example, you could train your doctor's offices that when you call, 1-800-MY-DOCTOR and you get the recording before you talk to a live human, you could have them put on there, hey, did you know, schedule online with our app, it takes 30 seconds, or you could wait 5 minutes and talk to a person, right? And so like that kind of will naturally push more into the app. But then you're gonna have to take a different tact for the actual offices, the doctors, the scheduling managers, whoever the persona is at the doctor's office for adoption there. It's gonna be a very different tact. For them, I think you hit on the right thing with training. Training is gonna be a big part of it. But the other big part of it is efficiency gained. And so if you're able to show them, hey, you previously had to have 3 people answering the phones and scheduling appointments, we can cut that down to 1, or you can at least repurpose those people to higher order tasks instead of having them do this manual thing over and over. So you can talk about the ROI, the efficiency gained. And what you're going to have to do is like a really concrete next step. What I recommend is to map out the buyer's journey or buyer's experience that your doctor's offices make when they're searching for scheduling solutions. For example, what do they type into Google? Where do they turn to for information? Is there an industry analyst that covers your space? You can do some win-loss analysis and see, are they even aware that you have a solution in this area? Maybe it's not being presented during the sales process, and so they're not even aware, or they didn't associate your company with that type of solution. If that's the case, you've got breakage somewhere else in your funnel that you need to go fix. But the first steps I would take if I were you, clearly articulate your buyer and user personas so you know who you're going after, and then do some up funnel research on win-loss analysis and so on to see what is going on and how they make their decisions. Hope that helps.
Awesome. Good question to kick us off, Daniel. Nicely done. Paul, we've got one here from Lisa, and then we had another one that was actually similar. So I'm gonna pair them up here for you. Lisa says, I'm a fan of Pragmatic and have taken most of your courses. The only course I have left is Build. Thank you, Lisa. Fantastic. My team is looking at our product or portfolio hierarchy. Any best practices or templates you would suggest for that? Also curious about suggestions of product naming practices or templates. The other question that was similar is, with times being slow for sales, there has been some discussion in my company of starting to sell our products in a portfolio. What are some of the important questions we should be asking ourselves before we move forward with that decision?
Okay, so let's sort of separate this into two basic questions: best practice for portfolio and naming, because they're two very separate topics. Portfolio first. So let's say you have a collection of products, right? You've got products A, B, C, D, and you're thinking about, well, naturally, they should be sold together in a portfolio. It's going to be an easier sell. It's going to be less expensive to sell. Maybe I don't need 4 different sales teams. I can have one sales team that focuses on selling the whole thing. Here's the rule of thumb. A product or set of products can belong together in a portfolio if they solve a related set of problems for your users. So think of problem as the tie that binds them together into a portfolio. That's really the thing that's going to make it work. So you think about traditional portfolios. Microsoft Office solves a related set of workforce productivity problems. Adobe Creative Cloud solves a related set of problems for creatives doing design work and so on. And so if the products solve a related set of problems, you're in pretty good shape. It's a lot harder to take a random set of products that don't solve a related set of problems and slap them together and expect it to work as a portfolio. Generally, that's when things start to fail. And so if you can articulate the problem, then you put it together in the portfolio. That's step one. Step two is to make sure you then treat the portfolio like a product. And so the portfolio is going to have its own set of positioning, its own requirements, its own business plan. Like I can guarantee that the product manager for, Adobe Creative Cloud or Microsoft Office, that there's a portfolio management role that's looking at that whole thing. And they're thinking about, how does the positioning for Office differ than that from Word, Excel, or PowerPoint? And we got to put it all together in a way that makes sense for the user. You're probably going to tell a very different story at the portfolio level. All right, so just a couple of quick tips for portfolios. Now, naming, totally different topic. And you asked for some other stuff to go read. My go-to here is Rees and Trout. They wrote a book called Positioning: The Battle for Your Mind. And that's sort of the mainstay that has been around for ages that marketers turn to for lessons around positioning and messaging and naming as a part of that. But they provide a line of thought that I think is really good to go on for naming. They describe naming as the hook upon which you hang your product. And so if the name is the hook upon which you hang your product and your positioning, it's a lot easier to think about naming, right? I should be able to look at that name and it should immediately resonate with me as to what problems are you solving with that product and why should I care about them? Now we can always go with made up names or names that don't mean anything, but the issue is that you then have to spend a lot of money in branding and in marketing to start establishing meaning around that made up name. So if you want to spend less money in the after, in terms of establishing meaning, then see if you can put some sort of meaning into the name. It's the hook upon which you're going to hang the rest of your product.
Excellent, Paul. I think we actually had some questions about naming last week as well with Diane. You'll be happy to hear that you two are in alignment on that, in agreement. Our next question asks, I'm interested in hearing some effective ways to manage views of roadmaps for different stakeholders, whether it be for leadership, client facing, etc. What do you think, Paul?
Roadmaps. All right. So roadmaps, first of all, bravo on the question. We don't have the same roadmap for all those different audiences, right? Where I see people getting into trouble is when they have a roadmap, singular, and then they try to show the same roadmap to executives, to buyers, to technical audiences, and so on. And it usually doesn't work so well because those audiences care about different things. They have different problems. We don't want to talk to them all in the same way. And so what you're probably going to want are different flavors of roadmaps. Now, for those of you that have come to our class called Build, we get into this really deep in that Build class, and we actually give templates on the Alumni Resource Center that Eddie talked about at the top of the call. If any of you are alumni of Pragmatic, you can log into that right now. You can download all these various templates. But we give templates for different flavors of the roadmap, and I think we have 3 or 4 in there. There's a roadmap that's focused on internal audiences, like engineering, for example. And in that roadmap, obviously, we're going to have a lot more detail than we would in others. But the key things we need to talk about with engineering are what are the themes, what are the goals, what are the business objectives we're trying to achieve in any given release of our roadmap or of our product. And so what I don't typically want to see on internal roadmaps is a listing of the 87 features that we're going to launch, because that's too deep. You know, if you're a product manager and you're tracking down Gantt charts and project plans and doing all that stuff, I know what you're probably not doing, and that's being out there listening to the market. All right, so internal roadmap focused on problems, not on individual features. All right, we give you a template for that. We also have a template for an external roadmap. That one's going to be for, you know, groups like executive buyers and so on. They don't need a high level of detail. What they need is something that gets them excited, gets them inspired, and educates them that we have a vision for our product. Because you got to think about what's the reason why you have a roadmap, especially in B2B. Well, you need a roadmap because it takes a long time to roll out a B2B product, and they want to align their plans with yours. And they also want to know that, you know, if they're going to invest a bunch of money with you, you're not going to abandon this product tomorrow. And so they're trying to see a roadmap just to verify that you have a vision, you're not going to abandon it, and they can align their technology plan with yours. But they don't need every single feature listed out in order for them to do that. So we can give them a high level and have that conversation with them. We can under communicate and over deliver instead of the other way around. We give you a template for that too. And then finally, third, you might want a roadmap for audiences like analysts or press. We have a slightly different flavor of roadmap for them. One that communicates our vision, but does it in such a way that it gives us a little bit of credibility so that when they see it, you got to understand audiences like analysts and press are jaded. When they see a roadmap, their first reaction is going to be, yeah, right. You know, tell me when that's actually done. And so they tend to discount any roadmap they see. And so we need a roadmap that establishes some level of credibility for us. And so a credibility roadmap is good for that. We give a template for this too. We typically manage these in Word, PowerPoint, and so on, and we distribute them to the right audience at hand. There are some companies out there that are now providing software tools in this space. You know, I know many of you are familiar with and may use tools like AHA and so on, but I can tell you that the majority of clients we work with, they still use the Office suite like PowerPoint to manage their roadmaps, in my experience.
Fantastic. And those can all be found in the Alumni Resource Center on the pragmaticinstitute.com website. We had a couple of people jump in the call after we started. Welcome. And just a reminder, if you'd like, if you have any questions that occur to you as we're talking, stick them over there in the chat and we'll toss them over to Paul. It's an Ask Me Anything, preferably on topics of product. But, you know, it isn't Ask Me Anything. Who knows what we'll get? Paul loves the surprises.
Ask me where the heck I got this shirt.
I'm going to ask you that later for sure. Here's another one that asks, I am fairly new to product marketing and feel like I only ever hear from the noisy 20%. I know I need access to the quiet 80%. So how do I do more market research? Oh, so I can do more market research. Do you have any suggestions for the best practices for doing this? I think the quiet 80% don't mind not being found, right, Paul? It's kind of the point of the name.
I mean, the quiet 80%, they just don't proactively reach out to you. They usually don't mind being reached out to and having conversations with you, but you have to do the reaching out to them. They don't come to you. Unlike the noisy 20%, which we all know, they will automatically come to you. They'll call you, they'll email you, they'll tweet at you. You know, they'll do whatever. That's what they do. And noisy 20% isn't bad. They're just noisy. And so we gotta have both ultimately, but you're gonna hear a lot more if you do nothing from the noisy 20 than you will from the quiet 80. So we gotta seek them out. There's a lot of ways to seek them out. We talked about win-loss analysis earlier. That's a really powerful way to do it. Start with wins, right? Wins are easy. Wins wants to talk to you because they like you. They just chose your product. And so that's usually a pretty low friction way to dip your toe into market research. If you haven't been doing a lot of it yet, start with a win analysis. Look at your last 5 wins. Why did they choose you, right? Did they choose you because you were the lowest price? Or did they choose you because you had the best features? Or did they choose you because of your reputation? I don't know. Maybe it's some combination of the 3. Wouldn't it be nice to know? So you can replicate that going forward. That's a good starting point. Beyond that, you can recruit people who call into support. You can catch people as they go through product training, especially if they're sitting in on Zoom calls like this. If you have virtual events that either your marketing team is putting on or are happening in your industry, like a virtual trade show or conference, that type of thing, you can catch people in those. You can go out and recruit people based on lists of people that you might buy from industry sources. I mean, there's a million ways to do it. But my challenge to everybody is to just start doing it, right? Set a challenge for you in the month of June that you're going to do 5 market visits, just 5, right? That's 1 per week, right? Pretty easy. And find them from a variety of places. Ask sales, do you know anyone to talk to? Ask your executive, ask your support team, ask your user experience team. You could probably find 1 from each of those, and that gets you, 80% of the way there. And so start with 5, see how it goes. You can always drop me a line and I'll give you some other ideas, but that's a great starting point.
And Paul, are you going to necessarily get different answers from the quiet 80% than you're getting from the noisy 20%? Why is it so important to have both those groups in your research?
Right. Sometimes you will, sometimes you won't, but it's really a question of risk. The noisy 20%, if you just listen to them, you're only listening to a fifth of your market. And what if they have a different answer than the other 80%? And so we do it to attenuate our risk so that we make sure we're hearing from everybody. Because if you just naturally listen to that 20%, then you are at risk of building the wrong thing for the 80%. And we don't want to do that.
Right. Good. Here's a good one I liked. We have recently added some new features to our software product and want to start targeting our competitors' customers to switch over to us. What are some ways we can reduce the switching costs for them without breaking our own budget? Paul, I've heard you talk about this one. I know you've got good answers.
Yeah, switching costs. So really important when we're talking to customers of competitors. And here's the good news. There's a lot of ways to address switching cost issues. Some of these are more costly than others, but I'll throw out 3 or 4 or 5 different ideas, and then you can take them back and decide what makes the most sense in your situation. So one way to do it, especially in software, is to build some kind of data migration or data ingest tool. So you think about, I use my Mac, and when I switched over from my PC a couple of years ago, there was a special software program that Apple had written that would automatically suck all the data out of my PC and drop it onto my Mac. Same thing when I changed from Android to iOS. You plug a cable between the two and it just automatically pulls everything over. Your internet bookmarks, your saved contacts, your phone numbers, everything. It's just there with one click of a button. That reduces switching cost because it gives them the peace of mind of knowing that, wow, all this investment that I've made in data and everything else over here is going to live over here in the new solution, and I don't have to worry about it. So that's a big mental switching cost issue that you could address by building a data migration tool. Another thing you could do is you could subsidize training or services. So for example, if you agree to switch over to our product, we'll give you free training, or we'll give you free implementation or a discount on those types of things. Sometimes they're worried about that, right? Because they have a big investment in this existing product and, maybe I want to switch, but man, the costs of switching are so high. Well, if the lifetime value makes sense, maybe I want to subsidize those things. You could give them a straight up credit for switching. You see this in the cell phone companies all the time today. They'll buy you out of their out of your existing contract. That's another way to do it. Back when I was at Cisco, one of the programs they ran was to provide a trade-in or trade-up credit. If you had a competitor, set of routers and switches and firewalls from like Juniper, for example, you could actually throw those away and we'd give you credit for your investment in those products to buy Cisco gear. And, obviously we did that to displace the competitor, but also because any future products you buy are probably going to be from you, and you can get ancillary services and add-on and cross-sell and upsell from doing that as well. All right, so you can buy them out, you can give them credit. And then finally, one other kind of sneaky way to address switching cost is through user experience. If you effectively copy your competitor's user experience, you can reduce the switching costs, make it easier for them to switch. And I think the easiest example of this one to think about is when you log into Google Sheets and Google Docs, which is their products that compete with Word and Excel. What I want you to notice is that the color scheme in Docs is blue and the color scheme in Excel and in Sheets is green, so they match. But then look at the little toolbar up at the top. All the icons are in the same order. They've got the same pictures. Everything's the same as Word and Excel. That's not on accident, right? They do that so that when you log into those tools, you say to yourself, oh, I already know how to use this. This is easy. And so they're lowering the mental switching costs, making it easier for users to switch over. So that's another way you can do it through user experience. So a couple different ideas there.
Paul, and I've heard you talk about an experience that you had where you were planning on switching banks, but ended up not doing so because of switching costs. Will you tell us that story again? That really hit it home for me about what switching costs are.
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, I had accounts with a couple of different banks and credit unions, as I'm sure many people do. And at the time, I was banking with one of those mega banks like Bank of America. And I also had an account at a local credit union here in Austin, Texas, where I live. And at the local credit union, I have lower fees. I get more personalized service. They actually know who I am when I walk through the door. So on a feature by feature level, my local credit union was definitely above the mega bank. And so I decided, you know what, I'm just going to switch all my banking from the mega bank over to my local credit union to get a better experience. Then the day came where I was going to actually make the switch. And I sat down at my computer, and as I sat down to start switching everything over, I thought to myself, I've got all my direct deposit with Pragmatic set up at Megabank, and I'm going to have to change that. So now I've got forms and HR and all that to deal with. And then I thought to myself, now I've got all my online bill pay set up with the Megabank. I'm going to have to replicate that on the new side. I could probably do that, but I'm going to miss something. And so now I've got to deal with the implications of a missed bill or payment. And so the net effect was I ended up not switching because the switching cost was too high. And so there's a million things the credit union could have done to make the switching cost lower. If they could have automatically set up my bill pay and automatically turned on direct deposit for me, that would have been a no-brainer. But that wasn't available. And so I ended up not switching.
Yeah. How many times have you looked at a product and said, this product is clearly superior to this product? Why aren't people switching to use it? There's your answer. It's probably switching costs.
More often than not.
Norm says, yeah, the design interface turned him from into a Google Slides user overnight. Me too. Absolutely. Yeah. Funny. My company is about to head back to our office after 3 months working remotely during the pandemic. Stay safe, folks. Many of our Nahito visits during that time have taken place virtually. Do you think this is a practice we should continue to adopt, or should we try to push in-person visits as soon as possible? Tricky. And are we losing any valuable research if we do continue to do remote Nahitos for the time being? All right, Paul, what do you got for us on that one?
Okay, so hopefully everybody's being safe as they go back. First of all, we want to be careful about that. Just to get everybody on the same page, when we say Nahito, that's an acronym, and it stands for nothing important happens in the office. And we use this as shorthand to represent a market visit or a field visit, getting into what I call their native habitat, wherever they live or work, so that we can discover their problems. It's essentially qualitative research, observational research, interviewing them, all the things you want to do as a product manager when you're sitting down with users and buyers and so on. We refer to that whole basket of things as Nahito or a Nahito visit. And so in an ideal world where there's no COVID, there's no coronavirus, et cetera, you want to do these in person. And the reason is there's a huge percentage of human communications that is nonverbal. And you miss those contextual clues when you try to do these over the phone. Zoom is somewhere in between. I can see this immediate space that's right in front of you, and I can at least see your facial expressions. But what I miss is that when I ask you to share your screen and show me how you're using my product, I miss that you turn over to your side and you pick up a set of sticky notes and you start to write something down and then you stick it somewhere else. It's a lot harder to see that, and you would see that in person. And if your product isn't software, if your product is a network switch that an IT administrator plugs into a network rack somewhere, well, guess what? It's a lot harder to do that kind of Nahito visit over Zoom. And so in-person is ideal. Now, if in-person isn't feasible, then Zoom is probably 70% as good, but it's no substitute. So ultimately, we probably want to do both because it's easier to get people on Zoom than it is to get you into their native habitat. So you're going to make space for both, but just don't forget the in-person and the value of doing that. And strive to do at least some of those face-to-face when you can and when it's safe.
We use a metaphor here at Pragmatic Institute called picking up a pencil. Can you tell us a little bit about that concept and why we should be looking for it?
Yeah. So the idea here is, like, let's say, I know many of you on the call or maybe watching this in the future have a software product. If they pull up your interface on the screen, they start to use it. And then at some point in their usage, they pick up a pen or a pencil and they see something up on the screen in your user interface, which they then have to like write down. And then they go somewhere else, either in your product or some other product, and they take this thing they just wrote down and have to key it back in, right? That is an indication of a failure of our technology or a failure of really understanding and empathizing with their problem. And so when we say, when do they pick up a pencil, what we're simply indicating is, when are they using some other process or sub-process or manual effort to shortcut around a shortcoming in your product? And so it's so important to find those. Sometimes they won't tell you about that stuff because they're not aware of it consciously, because they've gotten so used to working around stuff that they just do it. And if you ask them, hey, what do you like or don't like about my product? They don't think to tell you about the time they do this because they're just so used to it. So you got to go see it in order to find it.
Sneaky. The next question asks, Paul, do you think letting product managers and product owners work together to lead efforts on an individual product is a good decision? It would be my first time doing this. If so, do you have an outline or matrix of roles and responsibilities that would help to better clarify each of their duties, the product manager and product owner roles?
Yeah, so product manager, product owner, they should absolutely work together. But the devil's in the details, right? Like, what do we mean when we say product manager, product owner? We ask teams to take on that challenge of looking at the framework that we provide as part of our training, and then going through the gap analysis process that we provide. We can give you the tool set. It's on the Alumni Resource Center. And then seeing if you can highlight which boxes on the framework are going to be owned by the product manager, which ones are going to be the product owner, perhaps which one are going to be the product marketing manager. Titles are a total mess in our industry. And so I don't try to get too wrapped up in titles, but it is important to understand, what are these various roles going to do? But generally, when I think about a product manager and a product owner, they're like two peas in a pod. They work really strongly together, or they should. And in general, a product manager should be more outward facing. They're going to be in the market. They're going to be doing their Nahito. They're going to be doing their market research, setting product strategy, and so on. And then product owner is going to be a little bit more development or engineering facing. And they're going to spend more time with engineering on prioritizing the backlog, clarifying user stories and use scenarios, and so on. But they should be working together on a very regular basis, like at least weekly, if not multiple times a week, to make sure that they're in sync.
Speaking of relatively new product managers, here is a related question. This is my first role as a product manager, been here 10 months, but I'm not getting the feedback that I hoped for. What are some metrics or ways I can measure my own improvements in my product manager role?
That's a good question. Metrics for self-improvement. Let me think about that for just a moment. All right, so let's separate for a second metrics that would be appropriate for measuring a product and the success of a product versus metrics that would be appropriate for measuring your own personal success or achievement as a product manager. For a product, we typically will look at things like revenue attainment, customer satisfaction, NPS scores, return on investment, margin, things like that. Those are pretty clear. And they're also usually fairly easy to track. But for a person, product manager, it's a little harder, right? I mean, you could substitute some of those things for yourself as a person to say, am I continuously improving? But it's a little bit trickier because you could take a lot of actions as a product manager that don't show up in those metrics for quite some time. In fact, I could argue that, it might take 18 months between the time when I hire a product manager and the time I see output and things like revenue. A little bit tricky there. And so if I were hiring a new product manager and I wanted to see, are they growing in their role? I'm going to be looking for them to take on increasing scope of responsibility. I'm going to ask them to have the right attitude. So there's a lot of debate on, Facebook groups and everywhere on the internet now about, what's the appropriate analogy for a product manager? Is president of the product or CEO of the product an appropriate analogy? Some people would argue vehemently that the answer is yes. Other people would say no. I think it's a mindset, right? It's a mindset more than anything that says, as a product manager, are you just a manager of the features of your product? Or do you see your product as something much bigger? Do you see your product as starting with when the buyer engages with your website or starts searching, all the way through using the product through the end when they become a reference? It's the whole thing, right? And so I want that product manager to start taking on that mindset of being the president of the product and start to look at it more than just being a feature manager, but managing the whole experience from soup to nuts. And so increasing your responsibility, acting as the voice of the market is really important. I would measure my product managers in the past by putting a quota on them for Nahito visits. You know, how many times are you getting into the market to actually do your market research? You know, are you just sitting behind your desk all day, right? That's very easy for a lot of product managers to sit behind their desk all day and talk to engineering because they come from an engineering background. And so we tend to do what is comfortable, but being a good product manager means you got to go beyond that. And so those would be two that would come to mind right away. And, you know, obviously you want to increase your skills through training as well. You know, come to a Pragmatic class. Third metric is how much money did you give Pragmatic? No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, you should continuously increase your skills. And you know, obviously we can help with that. You can also read books. You can also watch webinars. I mean, there's a million ways you can improve your skills. Soft skills especially are going to be really important for a new product manager to develop, especially if you come from engineering, because product management is such a soft skill oriented role, right? You have to improve.
What sort of soft skills, Paul?
So when I say soft skills, I'm talking about things like negotiation with other executives. I'm talking about things like presentation skills and being able to tell a story. You know, we talk a lot about gathering the data and putting together the roadmap and the business plan, but you got to be able to tell a story about your vision for the product, where it's going, how the person you're talking to can contribute to that vision, and you got to map it all together for them. So storytelling, presentation skills, negotiation, influence is a big deal, because product management, there are very few product managers who can get away with going to an engineering team and say, do this because I'm the product manager and I said so. It doesn't work that way. Instead, it has to be a much more peer-to-peer influencing conversation. We're all in this journey together, and here's how I need your help, and we can go on this journey. So learning how to manage through influence rather than direct authority is pretty critical.
And Paul, did you know that you wrote an article called How to Be a Product Rock Star about soft skills? Because Norman sure did. He just posted a link to it over in the chat. If you're interested, how about that?
I knew that. Thank you. Yes, but it's a particular topic of interest for me, the soft skills part, because I think there's so much training and so much skill development that's been done on the hard skills side. And Pragmatic does a great job there. But the soft skill side, this is something that I believe can be learned and it can be taught. It's just not an area where a lot of product people have formal training. It's just, you know, you look at one person, you say, why are they achieving in their career? Why are they doing really well? Whereas somebody else maybe hasn't gotten to the same level. Usually it's because of that. They're good at the soft skills.
Yeah. Our listening audience, if you've got any questions that you haven't put out yet, but you're itching to, get them up there in the chat. Looks like we've got time for just a couple more for Paul. I'm going to throw this one at you, Paul. I was interested in some quick and easy ways I can go about gauging a customer's willingness to pay in a down market, such as this one. What do you think?
Great question. And this is one that was submitted beforehand. And so I had a little time to think about this. So what I want to do is I want to share with those of y'all that are still on here a quick tool that I would use to have this conversation. Are y'all able to see my screen now as I share that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So this is a tool that I would use. Doesn't necessarily have to be used in a down market like now. Although I guess the perception of this being a down market depends on what business you're in, right? If you're building ventilators, this is a pretty up market. Right? If you're building vaccines, this is a pretty up market right now. But for many people, it is a down market. So regardless of whether your market is up or down, if you want to establish what are people willing to pay for your product, there's a whole series of research techniques you can use. And I will just say, this is a really big topic. We spend an entire day just on this question in our price class. So if you want to go deep there, check out the price class. But here's a really quick and dirty technique that you can use to figure it out. But the crux of the problem is this. I can't show somebody a product. Like this is a product I just bought recently. It's a breathing trainer. And it kind of looks like a scuba mechanism, but basically you stick it in your mouth and it connects to your phone over Bluetooth. And it has a little vent here and here that control how much air pressure it requires to breathe in versus how much it requires to breathe out. And it measures the resistance in your lungs so you can like make your lungs stronger over time. Pretty cool. But here's the problem. If I showed this product to somebody and I said, hey, here's my product, my little breathing trainer, how much would you pay me for this? If I ask people that question directly, what kind of answers do you think I'm going to get? I'm going to get really lowball answers. People are going to say things like, oh, I wouldn't pay anything for that, or I'd give you $1 for that, right? People give you lowball answers because we as a society have been trained that when somebody asks us directly, what would you pay? We lie. We lie knowing that if I got really excited and I said, I'd give you $100 for that, you're going to try to charge me $125. And so what we do is we lowball the researcher, hoping that you will underprice it. So that's why you can't ask people directly, what would they pay? We got to find another way to do it. And so what I do is I would go and sit down, have a Nihito visit with one of your customers and just say, hey, on a scale that ranges from 0 to 100 of how much impact my product has on your life or your job, where would you put my product on that scale from 0 to 100? And they might say, well, if I were to drag this little dot around from 0 to 100, I would put your product pretty high. I would give it like, I don't know, like a 75. And you'd say, okay, 75, perfect. Now, what other products do you use in your business? Like Salesforce, pretty much everybody has Salesforce, right? How would you rate Salesforce on that same scale in terms of its impact on your job? If you're talking to a VP of marketing or VP of sales, they might say, wow, Salesforce is like huge for us. We like literally couldn't do our work without it. So that one's way up here. That one's like a 90, 95 out of 100. I say, okay. What about your Oracle? I know you use Oracle too. And they're like, that's a little bit lower. We don't really rely on that very much. It's like it's a 65 and so on. And you go through this exercise, just picking out a couple other products that they use in their life or job. And you see where they fall out in this scale. And so what you might find is if your product is here at a 75 and Salesforce is up here at a 95 and there's another product they bought down here, it's at a 70. Well, if they paid $1 million a year to Salesforce for their Salesforce instance, and this product right here, they're paying $500,000 a year for that, whatever that is, and they rated your product right here somewhere in between the two, well, it gives you a little bit of an indication of how much impact they feel from your product and how they hold it in comparison to things they're already paying for. And so you're starting to now detect how much they might be willing to pay for your product. If they put you right up next to Salesforce and the $1 million they spend for that, wow, maybe that gives us an indication of what we might be able to charge. Now, this isn't perfect, obviously. This is the first stage in a multi-stage research effort to figure out your pricing. But this is one thing that can give you that ballpark estimate to figure out where you might come in. And you can do this, with just a handful of customers to see where you might fall. So I think that's a pretty interesting little exercise you could take on.
Paul, you are a wealth of knowledge and also not a bad PowerPoint designer as well. That is a compliment.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today and for asking good questions, and Paul for answering all those questions. I'll just remind everybody that the next in our product chat series is Tuesday, June 9th, 1 p.m. Eastern time, where we'll hear from Bonnie Smith and Rob Jensen. They are senior consultants at Ignite Advisory Group, and they will be discussing managing customer advisory boards during the pandemic. So join us for that big topic. And then, of course, to get more of our instructors in this Ask Me Anything format, you can join us here every Friday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern time for office hours with a Pragmatic instructor. We'd love to have you back. And in the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, and have a fantastic weekend, everybody. See you next time.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.